over 200 years, the United States of America has been led by a president that is elected every 4 years. When this process was established in the Constitution, it was a radical new way to lead a nation. And for over 200 years, this system of a peaceful transition of power has been a cornerstone of our democracy. But how did it get started, and how does it work? That's up next on Fact Bites. Take you on another tour of the U.S. Constitution, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. So to understand why we have a presidential election every 4 years in the first place, let's go back to the 1780s. America was fresh off the Revolutionary War with Britain and was kind of experimenting with finding new ways to govern a country. Many of America's founding fathers were born out of the Enlightenment era, a period built on the philosophies of reform, individual freedoms, and more direct forms of government. Add this philosophical background to the colonists' bad breakup with King George III, and you can understand why the Founding Fathers were reluctant to have a centralized government with a strong national ruler. That sounded a little too much like the monarchy they had just fought a war to overthrow. Their first attempt at establishing a government was the Articles of Confederation, a document that only loosely associated the individual states and gave almost no executive power to the Congress, the only federal body of government at the time. So in 1787, the leaders of the day decided to completely overhaul the Articles of Confederation and held the Constitutional Convention. The big question: how would they unite the states under a central government while still ensuring that no one office would grow too powerful to squash individual liberties? Enter the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. By separating the ruling powers and sharing duties between these three branches, the founders were able to set up a system of checks and balances to thread the needle that is a democratic centralized government. Of the three branches, the executive branch was the one they were the most hesitant over. How would they ensure that this branch wouldn't start sucking up power from the other branches? They also wanted to ensure that this branch would be chosen by the people and for the people, unlike the kings who ruled on the basis of heredity around the world. Oddly enough, Alexander Hamilton proposed a leadership position that would be elected for life, barring impeachment. His reason was that the nation's leader should not be distracted by campaigning for additional terms or swayed in his decision-making by the threat of losing the next election. James Madison considered this to be an elected monarch, and the convention shot that idea down real quick. Madison, along with Ben Franklin and George Mason, countered that proposal with an executive council of at least 3 people to head the executive branch, ensuring that no one person would gain too much power. However, the Constitutional Convention didn't like that plan either. Ultimately, the Founding Fathers decided that the best way to avoid backsliding into a monarchy would be to institute a president who would be elected every 4 years. This position was outlined in Article 2 of the Constitution and stated that the president would be given all the powers of the executive branch, but that many of these powers would be subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. And it was our first president, George Washington, who ensured Article 2 was followed. Washington served 2 terms in office but chose to step down and retire from politics instead of running for a third. This decision was crucial. Washington was concerned that if he ran for a third term and died while in office, it would signify that presidents should hold the office until their deaths, making it a position for life. By stepping down, Washington instead set the precedent of not only giving up the office, and thereby not becoming a monarch, but also of serving only 2 terms. That's 8 years in office. This unofficial term limit was followed up until Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was elected an astonishing 4 times, serving 12 years and 3 months in office. After Roosevelt died while serving his fourth and final term, Congress passed the 22nd Amendment in 1947, making the unofficial rule of a two-term president constitutional law. FDR is the only president to have served more than 2 terms. All right, back to the early 19th century. Washington stepped down, but it is our second president, John Adams, who could have tested the peaceful transition of power that is so essential to American democracy. By the end of Adams' first and only term in office, he was largely unpopular, so it probably came as no real shock when he lost his re-election campaign to Thomas Jefferson. Because Washington had decided not to run for a third term, of course the transition of power from Washington to Adams was peaceful. But the election of 1800 would mark the transition of power from an incumbent who had wanted to keep the office but lost the election. Adams did the right thing and stepped down when Jefferson was decisively declared the winner of both the popular vote and the Electoral College. And this was a dirty election campaign. Jefferson's side called Adams a hermaphrodite in the press, and in return, Adams' team spread a rumor that Jefferson was dead. The two men, who had been BFFs, did not speak to each other for 12 years after the election. And Adams definitely did not like that Jefferson was president. He is one of only a handful of outgoing presidents who did not attend the inaugural ceremony of their successor. But Adams recognized that the safety and stability of America was more important than his own presidential position, and so he left the White House in the pre-dawn hours of Jefferson's inauguration to head home to Massachusetts. I'll also put out that Adams lost the election and his second son at around the same time, so his decision to avoid the inauguration was probably in part fueled by grief. That guy was just having a rough 1801. The important thing is, even though he was unhappy about the outcome, Adams respected the vote of the people and Congress and let Jefferson take over the presidency. As only the second president in the brand new country's history, it was vital that this democratic system put in place only a decade earlier be preserved, and the people were allowed to elect their own leader. If this is starting to sound repetitive, it's because it's that important. I need to say it more than once. Peaceful transitions of power are how you maintain a democracy. So now that we've gone over the whys, let's talk about the whats. What does the presidential handoff involve? Quite a lot. The executive branch consists of more than just the president, so when a new president is elected, the entire branch can change. The first change is obviously the vice president. Now, the VP campaigns and is elected with the president, but back in Washington's time, the vice president was the second runner-up in the presidential election, meaning the guy you campaigned against might be your partner for the next 4 years. When Jefferson took office, he proposed that the president and VP should run together on the same ticket and created the system we have today. Other positions that change are the president's cabinet. These are his advisors who head up the various government offices that he presides over. Today, the cabinet is made up of 15 departments ranging from national defense, agriculture, and education, just to name a few. The heads of each of these departments are selected by the president but approved by the Senate. They provide support and expertise to help the president govern. Another key piece of the executive branch is the executive office of the president. This office is responsible for supporting the president in his or her agenda. This office is a relatively new one. It was created in 1939 by FDR. It includes positions like the president's press secretary and the president's chief of staff, as well as teams like the National Security Council, the Office of Management and Budget, and the various groups who manage the logistics of operating the White House itself. Some of these positions also require congressional approval, but many are chosen at the discretion of the president, so no outside approval is required. All in all, there are more than 4,000 positions that the president must appoint, 1,250 of them requiring Senate confirmation. With that many jobs to fill, when does the president start working on these appointments? Well, many presidents begin this process even before they are elected. While they're brainstorming policies and agendas for a successful term as president, they will also begin identifying who will best fill these key roles in the executive branch. This will typically take place the spring before elections, after the candidates have been officially selected by their parties as the nominee. At this time, it is also necessary for the current or incumbent president to establish a transition council that will begin briefing the candidates on matters of national security and other important issues that an incoming president will need to know. This process was enacted by a bill passed in 2010 to ensure a smooth transition between leaders. In order to maintain a stable environment while the transition occurs, it's important that the new president can hit the ground running on day one, so making sure the guy or gal is as informed as possible is key. While all these procedures begin before the election takes place, the official start of the transition of power does not occur until the U.S. General Services Administration declares an apparent winner. The GSA is a government organization responsible for overseeing government spending. When the head of the GSA declares a winner, that releases funds that are reserved specifically for the transition of the incoming president, about $9.9 million. This duty was established by the Presidential Transition Act in 1963 and has been updated several times. In addition to these funds, the GSA also provides the incoming president and his staff with things like office space, office materials, and communications support. The next step in the handoff is the inauguration itself. The date of the inauguration was established by the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment, ratified in 1933, sets the exact day and time that the outgoing president loses their position and the new president is officially granted the powers of Chief Executive Officer, at exactly 12 p.m., January 20, when the new president takes the oath of office. This oath is also established in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The oath is traditionally administered by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, although that is not stipulated in the Constitution. Today, presidential inaugurations are also accompanied by parades, musicians, prayer services, and a speech from the new president. At the same time the outgoing president and vice president say farewell to the White House, the leaders of the presidential cabinet and the executive office will also say goodbye to make way for the new administration. It is customary for the associate leaders to also hand in their resignations, although they will usually stay for a longer period of time to act as interim leadership and ensure that the new heads are up to speed when they step into office. Remember that many of these positions must be approved by the Senate before they can start. Think that's the end of it? Nope. The official transition period for an incoming president starts before the election and then lasts until the first 200 days of their presidency. This allows them time to fill all 4,000 positions they can appoint, as well as kickstart the policies they promised during their election campaign. And there you have it, the complex process of transitioning from one president to the next. Though the process has changed significantly in the last 200 plus years, the key elements established by the Constitution have remained the same, to maintain the peaceful transition from one leader to the next. I've said it once, I'll say it again. This peaceful transition process is critical to maintaining an effective democracy where the right of every citizen to have a voice is protected and the security of our country is ensured. Disruption of this process is detrimental to the health of our democracy and the stability of our nation as a whole. To wrap things up, here's a few fast facts about the presidential inauguration. The shortest inaugural address ever was given by George Washington on his second election to office. It clocks in at only 135 words. Dude, that's a tweet. You just tweeted your inauguration speech. The longest speech was delivered by William Henry Harrison at a whopping 8,445 words. Harrison delivered this speech in the cold and the rain without a hat, gloves, or overcoat to prove he was not too old or frail to serve as president. Harrison died a month later. Though many point to this nearly 2-hour-long speech as the cause for Harrison's death, the sickness that killed him did not present itself until 3 weeks after the inauguration. It likely had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with DC's terrible sewage system. The first inauguration broadcast on the radio was Calvin Coolidge in 1925. The first inauguration broadcast on television was Harry S. Truman in 1949. And of our 45 presidents, only 4 have not attended the inauguration of their successor: John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Johnson, and of course, Donald Trump, all of whom only served one term and lost their bid for re-election. Thanks for watching!